and let the good times roll. Hey y'all, tell everybody, Mr. Jordan's in town.
Well, I was only a youngster, as you can imagine. I mean, I arrived in 1954, and I was 8 at the time. And my adopted parents had a big house in Underhill Road, East Dulwich, and we lived in the bottom flat initially, and every so often, like once a month or once every couple of months, they'd kind of clear the living room and they'd have what became known as a blues thing, and people from like Brixton and other black people and some white people used to turn up, and the music was a bit calypso-ish to start with, because I think most of them was from that era. But then as the years moved on, by the time I sort of got to about 12 and we'd moved, and I think we were then living in Nunhead, a road called Tresco Road, and it became much more bluesy. They used to sort of play Fats Domino, and it was much more kind of, because I can always remember the old men on the floor when sort of some of the records came on with the old kerchiefs hanging out the back and doing the old, because it was hot, sweaty, and the women were all kind of jumping around with the guys. And then when we moved from there to a bigger house where we had like two, these sort of big front rooms, they were like double. And everyone just used to went out in the garden sometimes. If it didn't fit in the bedroom, I can remember, helping to carry it out in the garden, and the food that would all be curry, always curry goat rice, sometimes fish, but mainly curry goat and rice. And then by then they started to actually charge for your drinks. I was only too young, but I can remember sort of somebody always stood in the kitchen table, by the kitchen. Beers either in the fridge or sort of on the side, and the rum, Ray and Nephews, which someone had probably brought over when they came from, because you couldn't, I don't know if you could, I mean certainly don't think you could have gone and just bought it like you can today. And then again it was just jumping. It was all these, what I thought were old people, what they call rubbing up a tune, because I always remember, women coming up to me, because they were saw it, and say, "Come now, Winston, come rub up a little tune with my boy." And it was kind of, and their rubbing up the tune was kind of, when you watched them, I mean, it was grinding. Yeah. It's like they were having sex. It's like they were having sex on the dance floor, because it was, all that sort of stuff. But I used to just love the music, because they had all the sort of Ella Fitzgerald, but they were mainly fast ones until it gets sort of towards the end, as the evening was kind of winding down. But it wasn't evening by then; it was kind of morning, and like the sound system was huge. They would sort of turn it down, the volume would go down a bit, and I can remember sort of. The smoochy bits and pieces, and you were told to keep out of that room or this room. And I never knew why, but I did as I got older. It was great fun. It was, and it's funny because I say it started the first time when it was calypso stuff, and there was always the innuendos one, because one I always remember was "Water Me Garden." Water Me Garden, and it was about sort of, I leave you to your imagination to sort of, and then, as I say, as the kind of years went out, and then of course you had I think what was happening was you were having this sort of Elvis Presley and all that, Bill Haley and that were coming out, and there was also a lot of the black guys that initiated those songs. And so of course they were being, you know, and so of course, you know, your Elvis Presley stuff, which they played sometimes, but basically they found, you know, because the black record shops were opening up in Brixton, because we always went to Brixton for shopping, and that's when they would put the word around that there's a what's it happening at Mr. Cooper's, because their name was Cooper, and there's a little thing happening at Cooper's in, you know, Earthbourne Road, Forest Hill, and it was easy to get to, and you know, those that didn't have a car came on a bus, and it was just brilliant, you know. And say the music just kind of moved through, you know, from calypso into sort of the bluesy American singers that could do that, and then sort of, you know, again continued on that way. But then by then you had sort of people from, you know, English black guys singing. So it was good fun. It was good. I loved it. I mean, you know, as a kid, you know, you got lots of food, you know, because there's always lots of food there. You know, as an adult, by the time I got to an adult, I mean, that kind of stuff, you know, it was reggae and stuff like that. It wasn't so much. I mean, I stopped with blues because I was a jazz blues man. I just loved the jazz and the blues. But yeah, it's good.
Reflecting back sort of, what, 50 odd years now, 55 years, how do you think that, you know, the Saturday night blues dance helped the adults with, like, their everyday lives?
Well, I think it because if you know, when you think back, when I think back in those days, and even though I was a kid, you know, I can imagine the element of racism that was around in the workplace, because, you know, I mean, even I was, you know, called names, not by sort of kids at school, because you know, yes, they did, but I can imagine sort of, because adults, you know, all right, Sambo, you know, and for them it was quite natural. I didn't really understand what it was about, but I can imagine for the sort of the adults, you know, that was their scene. You know, they could go down there on a Friday night, Saturday night, somewhere, and let it all happen. And there was obviously not the same kind of, you know, you don't. I mean, you know, if you had a white girlfriend, I mean, anybody that I knew that had a white girlfriend as such were to some extent ostracised from, you know, not from their communities, because they, you know, some of these blues things used to have people, you know, that used to bring their white girlfriends, because that was the only place in effect that they could, you know, socialise, dance with them, and the girls loved to dance because it was, you know, really nice bluesy stuff. And yes, I can imagine that, you know, that they would have got a lot of kick out of it, because even if it was like just a party, you know, that wasn't set up as a blues party, because I think a lot of the blues parties made money. You know, they were flogging the drinks, and you know, you're paying half a crown or a shilling for your plate of rice and peas or curry goat. And like, you know, it was a money, to some extent it was a money-making thing. But if you had a kind of party, so if I invited like friends around, whereas the bluesy the blues stuff was more about spreading the word, so people know where to go Friday or Saturday night for a bit of a session.
And let the good times roll.